In the grim darkness of the far future, where ancient empires clash across the stars and forgotten technologies slumber beneath alien soil, few encounters carry the weight of inevitability, quite like the meeting of the Necrons and the Emperor's Chosen. Imagine, if you will, a tomb world stirring from its 60 million year sleep, its automated systems flickering to life in the darkness, canoptech constructs beginning their eternal rounds of maintenance and security. Deep within the labyrinthine chambers of blackstone and living metal, something unexpected waits. Something that should not be there. Something golden. This is the story of what happens when the universe's oldest machines discover one of humanity's finest warriors, entombed in a shell of auramite and adamantium, sleeping the cold sleep of the nearly dead. This is the tale of when Necrons find a sleeping ancient Custodian Dreadnought within their tomb, and the catastrophic chain of events that follows. To understand the gravity of such a discovery, we must first comprehend what each of these forces represents in the endless war that defines the 41st millennium. The Necrons are not simply ancient, they predate the very concept of antiquity as younger races understand it. When the galaxy was young and the stars burned with different light, when the old ones still walked between worlds and shaped the destiny of countless species, the Necron Tyre looked up at their cancer-giving sun and dreamed of immortality. What they received was a curse disguised as a gift, a transformation that would render them deathless but soulless, eternal but empty. 60 million years ago, they entered their great sleep, waiting for a galaxy cleansed of the warp-spawned horrors that had made their final victory Pyrrhic. They are masters of technology that makes the Imperium's finest achievements look like children's toys. Their Gauss weapons strip matter apart at the molecular level. Their phase technology allows them to step between dimensions. Their understanding of the fundamental laws of reality surpasses anything the younger races have achieved. And yet, for all their technological supremacy, the Necrons awaken to a galaxy they barely recognize. The tomb worlds that should have preserved millions of sleepers have failed. Some have been crushed by tectonic shifts. Others were scoured by supernovas. Many fell victim to the scavenging of lesser races who had no idea what they were disturbing. Those who do awaken find their ranks diminished, their dynasties fractured, their empire reduced to isolated pockets scattered across the stars. The Great Awakening has been anything but orderly. Some tombs activated millions of years too early. Others slumber still, waiting for trigger conditions that may never arrive. The result is a race caught between their glorious past and an uncertain present, wielding godlike power, but lacking the unity and numbers to truly dominate the galaxy as they once did. Against this ancient might stands something equally extraordinary, though infinitely younger. The Adeptus Custodes are not space marines writ large, though that comparison is often made by those who do not understand. Where the Astartes are mass-produced soldiers created from a template of their Primarch's genetic code, each Custodian is a unique work of art, handcrafted through processes that begin in infancy and continue for decades. They are to Space Marines what Space Marines are to unaugmented humans. Each warrior is worth 1,000 lesser soldiers, a claim that in the grim darkness of the far future is not hyperbole but conservative estimate. Created by the Emperor himself during the Unification Wars on Terra, the Custodian Guard have stood watch over humanity's master for more than 10,000 years. They are his personal bodyguards, his heralds, his executioners when necessary. Where Space Marines are taught to work as a unit, to trust in the strength of their brothers and the wisdom of their sergeants, Custodians are towers unto themselves. Each is not merely a warrior, but a philosopher, a diplomat, a strategist of supreme capability. They were made to exist in the company of the Emperor, to engage him in debate and discourse, to serve not just as protectors, but as companions worthy of his notice. Their armor is crafted from auramite, a material so rare and precious that each suit represents wealth beyond the dreams of planetary governors. Their weapons are works of art that would make master artificers weep with envy. Guardian spears that combine power blades capable of cleaving through tank armor with integrated bolters, or sentinel blades paired with presidium shields whose energy fields can turn aside tank shells. Each piece of war gear is inscribed with the names of the custodian who bears it, adding to a tally that grows with each worthy deed, each enemy slain, each threat to the Emperor turned aside. And then there are the Dreadnoughts. When a custodian falls in battle, when their body is broken beyond even the Emperor's arts to heal, but their mind remains intact and their will to serve undimmed, they may choose entombment. This is not the fate that befalls wounded Astartes, where necessity drives the decision. For a custodian, it is a choice, an act of supreme dedication. Some who enter the sarcophagus do so seeking penance for perceived failures. Others volunteer because they will not turn aside from what they see as their sacred duty. A rare few are those who know they depart on missions as eyes of the Emperor and wish to ensure their service continues should they fall. The Contemptor Achilles pattern. Dreadnought is perhaps the most common variant employed by the Custodes, though common is a relative term when discussing an organization that numbers only 10,000. These war machines combine phenomenal strength and speed with the echoes of the interred custodian's own unmatched martial skill. Armed with the massive Achilles Dread Spear, a weapon that towers over even the custodian's own guardian spear, and incorporates a Corvée las Pulsar capable of punching through heavy armor and twin Lastrum storm bolters that can saturate an area with mass reactive fire, the Contemptor Achilles is a weapon of terrible beauty. But the true horror of facing a custodian dreadnought is not found in its armaments. It lies in the fact that within that shell of blessed metal and advanced systems, there remains a warrior whose skill exceeded that of space marine champions, whose tactical acumen could match the greatest generals, whose dedication to the Emperor's cause transcends the limitations of flesh. Death has not claimed them, pain has not broken them, the loss of their mortal form has not diminished their purpose. If anything, the fusion of custodian excellence with dreadnought durability creates something that approaches the divine, a walking avatar of the Emperor's wrath that will not stop, cannot be reasoned with, and knows no fear or hesitation. Now imagine these two forces meeting, not on a battlefield where both have come prepared for war, but in the deep places of a tomb world, where Necron technology has slumbered for epochs, and a custodian dreadnought rests in stasis, waiting for circumstances that would trigger its ancient systems to bring it back to furious life. The question is not whether such an encounter could happen, but rather how it might unfold, what it would mean for both sides, and what lessons we can draw from this collision of ancient power and eternal duty. The Necron tomb world, a sleeping giant, stirs. To understand how a custodian dreadnought might come to rest within a Necron tomb, we must first comprehend the nature of these vast underground complexes and the systems that govern their long sleep. Necron tomb worlds are not simply buried cities or military installations. They are planetary-scale stasis facilities, constructed using principles of dimensional engineering that have not been rediscovered by any younger race. Within chambers that seem to violate conventional physics, existing in pocket dimensions, accessible only through specific coordinates in real space, millions of Necrons wait in dreamless slumber. Each tomb world was constructed according to a complex template devised by the Necrontyr at the height of their civilization, before they shed their mortal forms and became the deathless machines we know today. The architecture incorporates principles of physics that the Adeptus Mechanicus has barely begun to theorize about, utilizing extra-dimensional spaces that allow vast armies to be stored in areas that from the outside appear far too small to contain them. The blackstone from which much of the structure is built possesses properties that interact with the warp in ways that even the Necrons themselves do not fully understand. remnants of Catan technology integrated into their works during the War in Heaven. The heart of every Tomb world is the tomb mind, a vast computational intelligence that oversees all automated functions. This is not a true artificial intelligence, in the sense that the men of iron were, those thinking machines whose rebellion nearly destroyed humanity during the Age of Strife. The tomb mind is instead a complex algorithmic decision matrix, capable of calculating efficient responses to any perceived threat, but lacking true sentience or sapience. It processes input from countless monitoring systems, assesses threat levels, allocates power between the tomb's three primary systems of command, reanimation, and translocation, and determines which protocols should be activated in response to detected intrusions. When a tomb world lies dormant, only the most basic systems remain active. Canoptech constructs move through the corridors in pre-programmed patterns, their scarab swarms repairing any damage to the tomb's structure, their wraiths phasing through walls to investigate anomalies, their spiders overseeing the maintenance of the stasis crypts. These are not true Necrons, but autonomous constructs, each one a marvel of engineering that would represent the pinnacle of achievement for the Adeptus Mechanicus, but which to the Necrons are merely tools, no more worthy of notice than a servitor is to an imperial tech priest. The awakening of a tomb world follows a carefully orchestrated sequence. When the tomb mind detects a threat that exceeds the Canoptech construct's ability to address, it begins allocating power to revivification systems. The first to awaken are typically the lower-order Necrons, warriors, and immortals, who possess only the barest fragments of personality, their minds having degraded over the long millennia of biotransference and stasis. These mindless soldiers follow their protocols with perfect obedience, forming defensive perimeters and eliminating threats according to tactical subroutines older than most civilizations. If the threat persists or escalates, higher-ranking Necrons begin their awakening. Lichguard and Deathmarks, elite warriors who retain more of their former consciousness, emerge from their crypts. Cryptechs, those masters of Necron technology who can manipulate matter at fundamental levels, activate their laboratories and armories. Lords and overlords, the nobility who once ruled vast territories when flesh still clung to their bones, rise to assess the situation and take command. At the highest levels, the Nemesor, or Pharaon, the supreme commander of the tomb world, may choose to awaken and personally oversee the defense of their domain. This hierarchical awakening serves multiple purposes. It conserves energy, ensuring that the tomb's power reserves are not depleted unnecessarily. It provides time for the more advanced Necrons to properly orient themselves, as the transition from stasis to full consciousness can be disorienting even for beings without biological brains. Most importantly, it allows for graduated responses to threats, avoiding the need to activate the entire tomb complex for minor incursions that lesser forces can handle. The protocols that govern these awakenings are ancient beyond measure, created during the final years before the Great Sleep, when the Necrons prepared for their long hibernation. They account for thousands of possible scenarios, from geological catastrophes to enemy invasions, from system malfunctions to the activities of primitive species who might stumble upon the tomb entrance. What they do not account for, what they cannot account for, is the presence of technology so fundamentally different from their own that the tomb mind struggles to classify it. Necron sensors operate on principles that would baffle Imperial tech priests. They do not simply detect electromagnetic radiation or measure mass and energy. Their scanners analyze the quantum states of matter, measure the flow of probability fields, detect distortions in the fundamental fabric of space-time itself. They can sense a human presence by the disruption their bioelectric field causes in the ambient etheric background. They can detect space marine power armor by the distinctive energy signature of its fusion reactor and the specific resonance of ceramite molecular bonds. But what happens when these sensors encounter something that operates on principles so foreign that no classification exists in their ancient databases? What occurs when the tomb mind attempts to analyze a technology that combines Dark Age engineering with secrets known only to the Emperor himself, wrapped in materials whose very existence was unknown during the Necrons' epoch of supremacy? The result is confusion, a rare state for systems designed to process information with perfect precision, and confusion in an automated defense network can have consequences that ripple through every aspect of the tomb's awakening. The physical layout of a tomb world reflects the hierarchical nature of Necron society, even in death. The outermost chambers contain the warriors, rank upon rank of identical soldiers arrayed in geometric precision, their individual crypt cells barely larger than the bodies they contain. Moving deeper, one finds the more elaborate resting places of immortals and elite units, chambers decorated with hieroglyphs that tell stories of ancient campaigns and victories long forgotten by all but their participants. The laboratories and armories of cryptechs occupy their own sectors, surrounded by fail-safes and quantum locks to prevent unauthorized access to their dangerous experiments and priceless artifacts. At the tomb's heart, in chambers whose grandeur reflects the occupant's status in life, sleep the nobility. These are not simple crypts, but vast halls, each one a monument to the ego and achievements of its resident. Here one might find holographic displays that endlessly replay pivotal moments from the war in heaven. Galleries filled with treasures plundered from 100 conquered worlds. Archives containing the collected knowledge of entire civilizations that no longer exist. And at the very center, in a sarcophagus of blackstone inlaid with living metal, and inscribed with the complete history of their dynasty, the Tomb Lord waits in darkness deeper than the void between stars. The entire complex is protected by layers of security that would make an inquisitorial facility look welcoming by comparison. Phase-shifted barriers that exist partially outside normal space-time prevent physical intrusion. Quantum entanglement sensors detect any unauthorized presence instantly. Scarab swarms, programmed to devour anything not bearing the correct identification codes, swarm through ventilation shafts, too small for human eyes to see. And everywhere, the tomb mind watches, processes, evaluates, making decisions with perfect logic and absolute ruthlessness. Into this environment of ancient technology and automated vigilance, imagine something appearing that should not be there. Not an invasion force that triggers obvious alarms. Not a geological upheaval that activates emergency protocols. But a single object, massive and metallic, lying in a chamber that the tomb's sensors insist should be empty according to every map and scan conducted before the Great Sleep. An object that radiates energy signatures completely foreign to the tomb mind's vast databases. An object that, when analyzed, seems to contain both technology and organic matter in a configuration that makes no sense, according to Necron understanding of lesser races. This is not merely an anomaly, it is an impossibility. And the tomb world's response to impossibility will determine whether this sleeping giant of a warrior awakens to combat or remains dormant, an artifact whose presence raises questions that even the tomb world's masters may not be able to answer. The Custodian Guard, the Emperor's finest. To appreciate what the Necrons have discovered, we must understand not just what a Custodian is, but what they represent in the hierarchy of humanity's warriors. In an Imperium filled with super soldiers, battle servitors, and genetically enhanced killers, the Adeptus Custodes stand apart. They are not simply better soldiers than Space Marines. They are an entirely different category of being, created through processes so arcane and resource-intensive that even at the height of the Great Crusade, their numbers never exceeded 10,000 warriors. The creation of a Custodian begins in infancy, not adolescence, like an Astartes. Candidates are chosen from the noble houses of Terra, selected not merely for physical potential, but for psychological compatibility and genetic markers that indicate they might survive the transformation ahead. What follows is not the surgical implantation of gene seed organs, the method by which Space Marines are created, but full genetic manipulation at the cellular level. Every aspect of the candidate's biology is rewritten, reshaped according to the Emperor's own designs, until what emerges is barely human in the conventional sense. This process is not standardized. Each custodian represents a unique achievement, a singular fusion of genetics, training, and psycho-conditioning that will never be exactly replicated. Where the creation of Space Marines follows a template laid down by the Primarch's gene seed, ensuring consistency across the legions and chapters, custodians are individuals from the moment of their making. Two custodians standing side by side may share no genetic modifications in common, each transformed according to a blueprint specific to their own biology and potential. The physical capabilities that result from this transformation exceed even Space Marine standards by a considerable margin. A custodian stands taller than most Astartes, their auramite armor adding to an already imposing stature. Their strength allows them to wield weapons that would require servo-assisted harnesses for a Space Marine to lift. Their reflexes operate at speeds that blur the line between reaction and precognition, their enhanced nervous systems processing combat data and executing responses faster than genetically unmodified humans can comprehend. But the true difference between Custodian and Space Marine lies not in physical prowess, but in mental capacity and purpose. Space Marines are created to be soldiers, warriors who fight as part of a greater whole, who trust in the strength of their brothers and the wisdom of their commanders. Their psycho-conditioning emphasizes loyalty to the chapter, obedience to hierarchy, and the ability to function as part of a coordinated military force. They are, for all their individual excellence, designed to be deployed in numbers to fight wars of attrition and conquest across thousands of battlefields simultaneously. Custodians, by contrast, are not soldiers, but champions. Each is meant to stand alone if necessary, a complete military force in a single golden warrior. Their training emphasizes not just martial prowess, but strategic thinking, philosophical reasoning, and the ability to analyze complex situations from multiple perspectives. They are educated in arts and sciences that most Space Marines would never encounter, taught to engage in discourse and debate, to understand the nuances of politics and diplomacy. This is because they were created not merely to protect the Emperor's physical body, but to serve as his companions, worthy of existing in his presence and engaging with his intellect. The weapons and war gear of the Custodian Guard reflect this emphasis on individual excellence. Where Space Marine weapons are, relatively speaking, mass-produced, created in batches to arm entire companies, each Custodian's armaments are unique artifacts. The Guardian Spear, their most iconic weapon, combines a powered blade capable of cleaving through tank armor with an integrated bolter system, allowing the warrior to engage threats at any range without switching weapons. The engineering required to create such a weapon, to balance the weight and power requirements, to ensure that the firing mechanism doesn't compromise the blade's structural integrity, represents craftsmanship that only the finest artificers on Terra can achieve. Their armor is perhaps even more remarkable. Auramite, the golden metal from which it is forged, is not merely decorative. Its molecular structure has properties that conventional metallurgy cannot explain, capable of turning aside blows that would shatter ceramite, distributing impact force in ways that seem to violate thermodynamics. Each suit is custom fitted to its wearer, not in the sense of adjusting sizes, but in being crafted specifically for their unique physiology, taking into account the particular genetic modifications that make them what they are. The result is protection that doesn't simply defend against attack, but seems to anticipate it. Energy fields, flickering into existence at the moment of impact, molecular bonds hardening at points of stress. This supernatural quality extends to the custodians themselves. Those who have fought alongside them speak of an aura that surrounds the Golden Warriors, a presence that seems to defy rational explanation. Bullets and blades that should strike home instead turn aside at the last moment. Psychic attacks that would shatter the minds of Space Marines simply dissipate when directed at a Custodian. Enemies find their aim faltering, their certainty wavering, as though the very universe conspires to protect these warriors. Whether this is a function of their genetic connection to the Emperor, some fragment of his own divine nature echoing through their enhanced biology, or simply the result of training and capability so refined that it appears miraculous, remains a matter of debate among those few scholars who have studied the Custodes. When a Custodian falls in battle, it is an event of such rarity that each loss is commemorated with the tolling of the Bell of Lost Souls, a ceremony that echoes across Terra and marks the passing of a hero whose like will not be seen again. For most wounded Custodians, the Apothecarian on Terra possesses medical technology sophisticated enough to heal almost any injury, restoring the warrior to full function regardless of the damage sustained. The Emperor's own knowledge informs their healing arts, allowing reconstruction at the cellular level, regrowth of destroyed tissue, even the repair of neurological damage that would leave a Space Marine permanently crippled. But there are wounds that exceed even these capabilities. When a Custodian's body is destroyed so thoroughly that restoration becomes impossible, when only fragments of tissue remain viable, but the mind remains intact and the will to serve has not dimmed, then, and only then, do they face the choice of entombment. This is not the grim necessity that drives wounded Astartes into Dreadnought sarcophagi. For a Custodian, becoming a Dreadnought is a deliberate decision, an act of will that speaks to dedication beyond what most beings can comprehend. Some who make this choice do so seeking penance. The Custodian Guard hold themselves to standards that would be unrealistic for any other warrior, and perceived failure weighs heavily on their psyche. A Custodian who believes they have failed in their duty, who survived when brothers died, or who could not prevent harm to those they were sworn to protect, may choose entombment as a form of self-imposed punishment. By binding themselves to a Dreadnought chassis, they ensure their service continues in a form that constantly reminds them of their perceived inadequacy, that they were not good enough to survive with their mortal body intact. Others volunteer for practical reasons. Those selected to serve as eyes of the Emperor, Custodians who depart Terra on extended missions into the galaxy at large, know that they may face circumstances where death is likely, but where their duty demands, they continue regardless. By choosing entombment before such missions begin, they guarantee that even catastrophic injury will not prevent them from completing their assignment. The Dreadnought becomes insurance, a fail-safe that ensures their service extends beyond the limits of flesh. A rare few make the choice simply because they will not turn aside from what they see as their sacred obligation. These are the oldest Custodians, warriors who have served for 1,000 years or more, who have stood watch over the Emperor since before the Horus Heresy. When their bodies begin to fail through sheer accumulated centuries of strain, when even Custodian physiology reaches its limits, they refuse to accept the honored retirement that tradition dictates. Instead, they choose the sarcophagus, trading mobility and sensation for the ability to continue their vigil indefinitely. The Contemptor Achilles Dreadnought that houses such warriors is not a typical Dreadnought in any sense that an Astartes would recognize. Where Space Marine Dreadnoughts are relatively standardized, following patterns that date back to the Great Crusade, each Custodian Dreadnought is an individual masterwork. The sarcophagus at its heart is lined with material whose composition remains secret even from the Adeptus Mechanicus, substances that interface with the Custodian's nervous system at levels that conventional cybernetics cannot achieve. The connection between pilot and machine transcends the mechanical linkages found in standard Dreadnoughts, becoming something closer to true synthesis. This allows the interred Custodian to retain capabilities that would be lost to a typical Dreadnought pilot. Their phenomenal reflexes translate directly to the machine's movements, allowing combat performance that exceeds what should be possible given the chassis's size and mass. Their strategic acumen remains undimmed, able to process battlefield data and make tactical decisions with the same clarity they possessed in life. Most remarkably, they retain the ability to employ the kata martial arts forms for which the Custodians are famous, stances and techniques that focus their already formidable combat skills against specific types of enemies. The Achilles Dreadspear, that serves as the primary weapon of these war machines, exemplifies the synthesis of Custodian excellence and Dreadnought power. Modeled after the Guardian Spear, but scaled to match the Dreadnought's increased size, it combines a massive power blade capable of punching through the armor of super-heavy tanks with a corvée laspulsar that fires directed energy beams with surgical precision. In the hands, or rather the weapon mounts, of a skilled Custodian Dreadnought, this spear becomes an instrument of calculated destruction, able to engage multiple threat types without pause or adjustment. The twin Lastrum storm bolters that supplement the Dreadspear provide area saturation fire, allowing the Dreadnought to engage infantry formations while simultaneously dueling with heavy armor. These are not the standard bolters used by the Astartes, but specialized weapons whose ammunition is handcrafted by Artifice Armorer on Terra. Each shell, a miniature work of art containing explosive cores, whose detonation characteristics are precisely calculated for maximum effect against specific target types. All of this technology, all of these capabilities, exist within a shell of auramite and reinforced ceramite that can withstand punishment that would reduce a Space Marine Dreadnought to scrap. The armor incorporates refractor fields and phase iron plating, layers of protection that interact in ways that make targeting weak points nearly impossible. Even if an enemy manages to breach the outer hull, internal systems immediately seal the breach. Scarab-like repair constructs swarm to restore integrity, and backup power cells activate to ensure continued function. But beyond all the technical specifications, beyond the impressive statistics and the catalogue of weapons systems, lies the fundamental truth that makes a Custodian Dreadnought so formidable. Within that sarcophagus beats a heart that will not quit, minds that refuses to acknowledge defeat, and a will that has transcended the limitations of mortal flesh without losing one iota of human determination. This is a warrior who was the equal of Astartes champions before their transformation, who fought at the Emperor's side during the darkest days of the Horus Heresy, who has stood vigil for millennia and will continue to do so until the last enemy of mankind has been cast down. This is what sleeps within the Necron tomb, not merely a weapons system or a military asset, but a demigod of war who carries within their mechanical heart the last embers of the Emperor's own divine purpose. When such a warrior awakens, the galaxy itself takes notice, and when they awaken, surrounded by enemies who represent everything humanity must overcome to survive, the resulting conflict will echo across the ages as a testament to the supreme will that humanity's finest embody and the implacable determination of the Necrons to reclaim what they see as their rightful dominion. The impossible presence, how fates converge. The question of how a Custodian Dreadnought comes to rest within a Necron tomb admits several possibilities, each reflecting different aspects of the galaxy's endless conflicts and the countless ways fate interweaves the threads of different civilizations. Perhaps the most straightforward explanation involves a direct military confrontation on a world where neither faction initially realized the other had claim. The Imperium, conducting archaeological surveys or establishing a new colony, inadvertently builds upon the surface of a dormant tomb world. The Custodian Guard, deployed to protect high-value Imperial interests or investigate reports of Xenos activity, encounters the first stirrings of Necron awakening. In such a scenario, combat would erupt with shocking speed. The Necrons, perceiving the Imperial presence as an invasion of their sovereign territory, would respond with overwhelming force. The Custodian, outnumbered but supremely capable, would fight with the calculated fury for which their order is renowned. The engagement might range across kilometers of subterranean tunnels, through chambers where alien technology hums with purpose, past stasis crypts beginning to flicker with activation light. Imagine the Custodian Dreadnought holding a choke point against wave after wave of Necron warriors, the green lightning of Gauss flares washing over Auramite armor that refuses to yield. The Achilles Dread Spear, striking with precision, that reduces immortals to scattered components faster than their reanimation protocols can restore them. But for every Necron destroyed, 2 more phase into existence. The tomb is vast, beyond measure, and its reserves of warriors number in the millions. Even a Custodian has limits. The crisis point comes when the Dreadnought's power reserves begin to deplete. The storm bolters fall silent, their ammunition drums exhausted. The Dreadspear's energy field flickers, requiring careful power management to maintain. The refractor field that has turned aside so many Gauss beams wavers, moments from collapse. The Custodian knows they cannot maintain this defensive position indefinitely, but retreat is not an option when Imperial citizens or assets lie behind their line. They prepare for a final stand, ready to sell their continued existence as dearly as possible. It is at this moment that the cavern floor gives way. Perhaps undermined by the tomb's own defensive measures, perhaps weakened by the combat that has raged across it, the stone collapses, sending the Dreadnought plummeting into depths that even the tomb mind had not accounted for. They fall through layer after layer of ancient construction, crashing through barriers that were never meant to be breached from above, until finally coming to rest in a chamber so deep and so isolated that it does not even register on the tomb's active sensor grid. The impact would be catastrophic for a lesser machine. The Dreadnought's systems flicker on the edge of shutdown, power levels critical, structural damage severe enough to immobilize the chassis. But Custodian engineering incorporates fail-safes within fail-safes, redundancies stacked upon redundancies. The sarcophagus automatically seals, protecting the pilot from the immediate danger. Emergency stasis protocols activate, putting the interred Custodian into a state of suspended animation to conserve what little power remains. Distress beacons begin pulsing on frequencies that might someday reach allies who could mount a rescue. Above, the Necron warriors investigate the collapse, but find no trace of their enemy. Sensor sweeps detect nothing. The damaged section of tunnel is marked for repair by Canoptech constructs and forgotten as the tomb mind redirects its attention to the surface, where other Imperial forces still present an active threat. The Custodian Dreadnought, entombed within its tomb within a tomb, waits in darkness that only machines can endure. But there exist other possibilities, scenarios that speak to the stranger elements of warfare in the 41st millennium. Consider a different path to this same outcome. The Imperium discovers something of immense value on a barren world, perhaps an STC fragment, or a cache of archaeotech, dating to the dark age of technology. Standard protocol for such discoveries involves immediate military lockdown and the deployment of the finest troops available to secure the site. When the discovery is deemed sufficiently important, when the potential reward outweighs the tremendous cost, the Adeptus Custodes themselves may be dispatched. The Custodian Guard's investigation reveals anomalies in the planet's structure, readings that suggest vast hollows beneath the surface, energy signatures that do not match any known Imperial technology. Before a full assessment can be completed, catastrophe strikes. A warp storm, one of the countless tempests that plague real space in this age of darkness, engulfs the system. Distortions in the Imperium make navigation impossible. Ships are torn from their moorings in space, scattered across light-speed impossible distances. Communication becomes impossible through the howling psychic winds. When the storm finally clears, weeks or months or even years later, the few ships that manage to regroup find the excavation site abandoned. No trace of the Custodian force remains, no sign of what befell them. What they cannot know is that the storm's reality warping effects triggered a catastrophic resonance with ancient Necron phase technology buried deep beneath the planet's crust. In a moment of impossible coincidence, the barriers between dimensions fluctuated wildly, and the Custodian Dreadnought was pulled through layers of reality and rock space deposited in a chamber that exists partially out of phase with normal space. Or perhaps the truth is even stranger, a product of the time-bending technologies that the Necrons occasionally employ. The Cryptex, those masters of Necron science who can manipulate the fundamental laws of physics, sometimes construct devices that operate on principles incomprehensible to lesser races. Chronometers that run backward, portals that open into yesterday, stasis fields where 1,000,000 years pass as a single heartbeat, or where centuries of subjective time occupy mere moments of objective reality. A Custodian Dreadnought, engaging Necron forces in what should have been a straightforward combat operation, might find itself caught in the effect radius of such a device. One moment, they are advancing through a Xenos structure, clearing rooms with methodical precision. The next, reality itself convulses. Time loops, folds back upon itself, creates paradoxes that should not be possible. When stability returns, the Dreadnought finds itself in a place and time that makes no sense, surrounded by technology that should not exist. The only sound, the slow tick of its own internal chronometers, counting seconds that may not align with the seconds being counted outside. From the Necron perspective, this would register as an even greater impossibility. Their sensors would detect an object that appears to have always been there, and yet whose presence contradicts every scan conducted before their great sleep. The tomb mind, processing this contradiction with the limited flexibility of its algorithmic intelligence, might simply classify the Dreadnought as a pre-existing anomaly, something to be investigated when resources allow, but not an immediate threat requiring active response. There exists another possibility, one darker and more disturbing in its implications. The Necrons are not above using other species' assets for their own purposes. Trazin the Infinite, for example, maintains galleries filled with living exhibits captured from across time and space, entire armies frozen in tableau to commemorate historic battles. Other Necron lords might see value in acquiring specimens of the Imperium's finest warriors, studying them to better understand humanity's capabilities. A Custodian Dreadnought, captured through treachery or overwhelming force, transported to a tomb world for analysis and storage, might be placed in a vault deep within the complex. But tomb worlds are not static environments. Over the millennia of the Great Sleep, power redistribution might cut energy to certain sectors. Canoptech constructs, following ancient protocols, might seal off damaged areas to prevent system-wide failures. The chamber containing the captured Dreadnought, along with whatever Necron tech was meant to keep it contained, becomes isolated, lost in the vast labyrinth of the tomb structure. When the tomb finally begins to awaken, when power flows again through corridors dark for millions of years, when sensors flicker back to life and begin their automated surveys, they detect the Dreadnought's presence. But the context is lost. The records that would explain how it came to be there, why it was captured, what studies were conducted, all of this information resides in isolated data cores that have not yet been reintegrated into the Tomb Mind's network. What remains is simply the fact of the Dreadnought's existence, an anomaly that demands explanation. Regardless of which scenario brought the Custodian to this place, the result is the same. Deep within a Necron tomb world, surrounded by technology that predates human civilization by millions of years, entombed in a shell of auramite and adamantium, a warrior of the Adeptus Custodes waits. Their last conscious thought before stasis might have been of duty unfulfilled, of the emperor they serve still, standing watch over a turbulent Imperium, of brothers who would wonder at their fate, or perhaps for one who has already chosen the half-life of Dreadnought entombment. Their last thought was simply of purpose, of the eternal vigil that continues regardless of flesh or circumstance. The tomb mind knows they are there now. Sensors that can detect quantum fluctuations and measure probability fields have finally registered the Dreadnought's presence, categorizing it as an unknown variable requiring investigation. Canoptech constructs receive new instructions, their autonomous programs updated to include the mysterious object in their patrol routes. Higher-level protocols begin their cascade, determining whether this anomaly warrants the awakening of cryptechs who can properly analyze it, whether it represents a threat that requires military response, or whether it is simply one more mystery in a galaxy full of inexplicable phenomena. The Dreadnought systems, operating on power reserves that would have been exhausted long ago in any conventional machine, maintain the basic functions that keep the pilot alive. The sarcophagus environment remains stable, life support continuing its eternal task of preserving the last remnants of organic matter within the mechanical shell. Security protocols monitor the surrounding environment, ready to trigger full awakening if certain conditions are met. And deep within, beyond the reach of any sensor, save perhaps those that touch the Imperium itself, the Custodian's consciousness waits in a state that is neither sleeping nor waking, neither living nor dead. Two forces, ancient beyond mortal comprehension, rest in proximity. One side of this equation represents the dying dream of an empire that once spanned the galaxy, living metal bodies waiting to reclaim dominion they see as rightfully theirs. The other embodies humanity's stubborn refusal to submit to extinction, the divine fire of an emperor's will made manifest in a warrior who will not yield. When these forces clash, as inevitably they must, the result will be conflict on a scale that transcends simple military confrontation. It will be philosophy made flesh, ideology rendered in violence, two visions of the galaxy's future, meeting in contest that can have only one outcome. The tomb world continues its slow awakening. Power flows through ancient conduits. Systems long dormant flicker to life. Warriors begin to stir in their crypts. And somewhere in the depths, a Custodian Dreadnought's power reserves tick upward, emergency protocols assessing whether conditions are suitable for emergence from stasis. The countdown to confrontation has begun, measured not in seconds or minutes, but in the slow processes of tombs awakening and ancient technology coming back online. Neither side yet knows what the other represents. Neither can anticipate how profoundly this meeting will affect their understanding of the galaxy and their place within it. The question is not whether conflict will come, but when and what form it will take when two of the 41st Millennium's most formidable forces finally acknowledge each other's presence. First contact. When Canoptech constructs, investigate. The initial investigation of the anomaly falls, as such tasks always do, in a tomb world's hierarchy of responsibility, to the Canoptech constructs. These autonomous machines form the backbone of tomb maintenance, tireless workers who have labored ceaselessly through 60 million years of the Great Sleep, repairing damage, maintaining systems, defending against intrusions too minor to warrant awakening actual Necron forces. They approach the Custodian Dreadnought with the single-minded purpose that defines their existence, ready to categorize, analyze, and if necessary, eliminate this unexpected presence in their domain. The first to arrive are the Canoptech scarabs, swarms of beetle-like constructs, each no larger than a human fist, but capable of performing feats of engineering that would astound Imperial tech priests. They swarm over the Dreadnought's surface in waves of metallic bodies, their sensor arrays probing every millimeter of the auramite armor, attempting to understand the material composition, the energy signature, the purpose of this massive construct. Their programming includes templates for millions of different substances and structures encountered during the Necron civilization's apex, yet nothing in their databanks matches what they are scanning. The scarabs detect the molecular structure of auramite, but cannot classify it according to any known metallurgical pattern. They analyze the ceramite layers beneath and find properties that seem to contradict their understanding of how crystalline structures should behave under stress. The power signatures emanating from within the chassis register on their sensors, but follow no recognizable pattern, fluctuating in ways that suggest both technological and biological components in configurations that make no sense to machine intelligence designed to process orderly, logical systems. Most puzzling of all is what the scarabs detect when they probe deeper, attempting to sense the contents of the sarcophagus at the Dreadnought's heart. Their scanners, capable of analyzing matter down to the quantum level, encounter barriers they cannot penetrate. The sarcophagus casing incorporates materials whose atomic structure seems to shift when observed, as though the very act of measurement changes what is being measured. Beyond these barriers, the scarabs detect life signs, organic matter that registers as simultaneously living and not living, consciousness in a state that defies classification as either active or dormant. Unable to comprehend what they have found, the scarabs follow their protocols and summon larger, more sophisticated constructs to assist in the analysis. Canoptech wraiths phase into the chamber, their serpentine bodies undulating through the air with movements that seem to ignore gravity and inertia. These are hunter-killers, normally deployed to eliminate intruders who penetrate the tomb's outer defenses, but they also possess sensor suites more advanced than the simple scarabs. The wraiths circle the Dreadnought warily, their dimensional destabilization matrices active and ready to shift out of phase with real space should the object prove hostile. The wraiths approach the investigation from a different angle than the scarabs, less concerned with material composition and more focused on threat assessment. They analyze the Dreadnought's weapon systems, noting the dormant but potent energy readings from the Achilles Dreadspear, the empty but clearly functional ammunition feeds for the Stormbolters. They detect the refractor field generators, currently inactive but clearly capable of projecting defensive barriers when powered. Most concerning of all, they identify what appears to be a reactor core, whose output, if fully activated, would rival that of smaller Starship engines. From a defensive perspective, the Wraith's assessment is clear. This object, whatever its origin or purpose, represents a significant potential threat. Its weapon systems are sophisticated enough to pose danger to even armored Necron units. Its mobility, when not compromised by whatever damage has left it inactive, would allow for rapid repositioning that could threaten tomb installations. The presence of what appear to be targeting systems suggest autonomous combat capability. Protocol dictates that such threats be neutralized before they can activate. But the Wraiths, for all their destructive potential, are not decision makers. They lack the authority to destroy unknown artifacts without higher approval. Their programming includes strictures against damaging potentially valuable discoveries, remnants of ancient Necron scientific protocols that predate the biotransference. Instead of attacking, they establish a perimeter, their phase-shifted bodies creating a containment field around the Dreadnought, while they transmit their findings back to the tomb mind for analysis and instruction. The tomb mind receives the data and processes it, with the limited flexibility available to algorithmic intelligence operating without higher-level oversight. The information creates cascading decision trees, each path leading to new questions that demand answers before action can be taken. The object is clearly technological, but doesn't match any known xenospecies in the database. It contains organic components, suggesting a hybrid construction that several races have attempted, but few have successfully achieved. Its power signature indicates capabilities that exceed standard threat parameters for individual units. Cross-referencing against historical data provides no clarity. During the War in Heaven, the Necrons fought countless different species across millions of worlds. The Old Ones seeded new races as weapons against the Necrons and their Citan masters. Some of these species survived the war and evolved into the forms known today. Others were extinct long before humanity first looked up at the stars. The tomb mind cannot rule out the possibility that this is a remnant from that ancient conflict, some weapon or soldier from a forgotten battlefield that somehow found its way into the tomb during the long millennia of the Great Sleep. But there are details that don't fit this explanation. The object shows no signs of age beyond relatively minor wear and damage. Its technology, while foreign, doesn't match the aesthetic or engineering principles of any recorded Old One creation. Most tellingly, the energy signatures contain elements that the tomb mind recognizes as similar to technologies employed by the dominant local civilization, a young species that calls itself humanity and has spread across the galaxy with impressive if foolhardy speed. The connection to humanity creates its own complications. The Necrons have encountered the Imperium of man before, on countless battlefields across the awakening tomb worlds. These encounters have established that while humans are primitive by Necron standards, they are not to be underestimated. They field armies numbering in the billions, equipped with weapons that, while crude, can inflict damage through sheer volume of fire. More concerning, they have demonstrated a distressing tendency toward fanaticism that leads them to continue fighting long past the point where logic would dictate retreat. But never, in any recorded encounter, has the Imperium deployed technology remotely comparable to what the tomb mind is now analyzing. Human war machines are loud, crude, powered by reactions that waste tremendous amounts of energy while producing minimal output. This construct is different. Its systems demonstrate efficiency that approaches Necron standards, power management that suggests understanding of advanced physics, materials science that exceeds what the Imperium should be capable of producing. The tomb mind reaches a conclusion. This requires cryptech analysis. The autonomous constructs have gathered all the data their sensors can provide, but interpreting that data, understanding its implications, deciding on an appropriate response, these tasks exceed the capacity of simple, automated systems. The protocols activate, sending signals deep into the tomb's structure, to laboratories where cryptechs sleep in stasis crypts, surrounded by the tools of their trade. A cryptech's awakening follows a different pattern than that of a warrior. The revivification process includes activation of vast knowledge databases, restoration of memory engrams containing millennia of scientific study, recalibration of sensor systems that can analyze reality at levels beyond what even other Necrons can perceive. For a cryptech, especially one specialized in analyzing alien technology and countering enemy capabilities, awakening is not merely a return to consciousness, but a reconnection with accumulated wisdom that spans geological epochs. The cryptech who receives the summons is ancient, even by Necron standards, their designation in the tomb's records indicating they served as a master of dimensional manipulation during the final campaigns of the War in Heaven. They rose from their crypt with processes that appear to take hours. Though the subjective experience for the cryptech is instantaneous, one moment suspended in timeless darkness and the next fully conscious and aware. The first thing they do is access the data gathered by the canoptech constructs, reviewing sensor logs and analytical reports with attention that no human scholar could match. What they see fills them with something approaching curiosity, an emotion that most Necrons have long since lost to the degradation of personality that biotransference inflicted. The construct before them represents genuine novelty, a word that holds special significance for beings who have existed for millions of years and have seen most of what the galaxy has to offer. The technology is sophisticated, but built on principles fundamentally different from those the cryptech knows. The hybrid nature of organic and mechanical components suggests understanding of biotechnology that most younger races have not achieved. The cryptech approaches the Dreadnought personally, their form gliding across the chamber floor with mechanical grace. They extend sensor probes that make the canoptech scans look crude by comparison. Instruments that can measure probability fields, detect quantum entanglement, analyze the spin states of individual electrons. They work with the careful precision of a master surgeon, probing without penetrating, analyzing without disturbing, gathering information while minimizing any chance of triggering defensive responses. What they discover both confirms and contradicts their initial hypotheses. The construct is definitely of human origin, bearing hallmarks of Imperial technology in its basic systems and structural design. But the sophistication level exceeds anything previously documented from that species. The materials used in its construction include several that the cryptech cannot identify, substances whose atomic structure suggests they should not be stable under normal physical conditions, yet persist without degradation. The power source at its heart operates on principles that don't match standard Imperial fusion technology, incorporating elements that suggest knowledge of quantum mechanics at levels far beyond what humanity's tech priests typically demonstrate. Most intriguing of all are the organic components sealed within the central sarcophagus. The cryptech's sensors can penetrate the shielding enough to confirm that a biological entity resides within, connected to the machine through neural interfaces of breathtaking complexity. But the nature of that organism defies analysis. It registers as human in basic genetic structure, yet the modifications to that baseline are so extensive that calling it simply human seems inadequate. Enhancement at the cellular level, organs that don't match standard human anatomy, neurological systems that process information at speeds that should require full artificial augmentation. The cryptech processes all of this information, comparing it against vast databases of xenobiological research conducted over millions of years. Cross-referencing produces no exact matches, but patterns emerge. The level of genetic manipulation suggests work by a master hand, someone with understanding of biology that rivals what the old ones once possessed. The integration of organic and mechanical systems shows engineering skill that few species ever achieve. The sheer amount of resources required to create even a single example of this construct indicates a civilization with tremendous industrial capacity and willingness to invest that capacity in individual warriors. This leads to a hypothesis that, if true, would be significant indeed. The cryptech has heard reports from other awakened tomb worlds of a particular class of human warrior, elite soldiers who serve their species' emperor directly and who fight with capability that exceeds even the Imperium's standard super soldiers. These so-called custodians are rare, deployed only in circumstances of supreme importance, and their technology is said to represent the pinnacle of human achievement. If this construct houses one of these legendary warriors, it would explain the sophistication level, the advanced materials, the integration of technologies that exceed standard Imperial capabilities. But it also raises urgent questions about how such a valuable asset came to be in this location. Custodians do not operate casually or in isolation. Their deployment suggests Imperial interests of the highest priority. If one of their number is here, others may follow. Worse, the Imperium may already know the location of this tomb world and could be preparing invasion forces to reclaim their lost warrior. The threat level calculation shifts dramatically. What began as a curious anomaly has become a potential security breach of catastrophic proportions. The cryptech makes their decision. The Dreadnought must be preserved, both for study and as potential leverage should negotiations with Imperial forces become necessary. But it must also be secured more thoroughly, moved to a location where it can be contained if it awakens, and protected if external forces attempt recovery. Most importantly, this development requires the attention of the tomb's highest authority. This is no longer a matter for cryptechs and canoptech constructs to handle alone. The Overlord must be informed. Deep in the tomb's central complex, in a vault whose doors have not opened since the Great Sleep began, activation protocols begin their cascade. Power flows to systems that have been dormant for 60 million years. Stasis fields begin to dissipate, releasing the noble who commands this entire world and all the forces it contains. The Overlord is awakening, and with them comes the full weight of Necron's strategic planning, tactical genius, and implacable will. The Custodian Dreadnought's presence has escalated from anomaly to crisis. What happens next will depend on decisions made by beings whose perspectives and priorities could not be more different. On one side, an ancient machine god who views the galaxy as rightfully belonging to their kind and any other species, as temporary obstacles to be removed. On the other, a warrior sworn to defend humanity against all threats, whose dedication to their emperor transcends death itself, and who will not surrender while the capacity for resistance remains. The stage is set for a confrontation that will test both sides in ways they cannot yet anticipate. And somewhere in the depths of that armored sarcophagus, power reserves tick slowly upward, emergency systems drawing energy from sources the Necrons have not yet discovered, preparing for the moment when circumstances require the Custodian's return to wakefulness. Neither side knows when that moment will come, but both will soon learn that some warriors are bound by oaths that no amount of time or circumstance can break. The Overlord awakens. Strategic assessment. The awakening of a Necron. Overlord is an event weighted with ceremony even in times of crisis. These are not mere soldiers or administrators, but nobles who once ruled star systems, whose every command shaped the destinies of billions of souls when they still possessed such things. The revivification protocols acknowledge this status, restoring not just consciousness, but context, uploading millennia of memories, reactivating strategic subroutines that contain the accumulated wisdom of countless campaigns. The Overlord comes to awareness already fully briefed, already understanding the situation, already formulating responses. This particular Overlord, designated in the tomb's records by a name glyph that translates poorly into human language, but might be rendered as Xandrek's eternal patience, had commanded the tomb world since before the biotransference. In life, when flesh still clung to bones and blood flowed through mortal veins, they had been a strategic genius whose campaigns were studied in Necron-tire military academies. In undeath, those capabilities have not diminished. If anything, the transformation freed them from biological limitations, allowing perfect recall of every battle fought, every tactic employed, every enemy defeated. The Overlord's first action upon awakening is to access the full scope of reports submitted by the Cryptek and the Canoptek constructs. They review sensor data with attention to detail that would seem obsessive in a lesser being, but which for them represents standard analytical procedure. Every measurement is examined, every anomaly is noted. The Cryptek's conclusions are weighed against their own vast database of experience and knowledge. Within microseconds of consciousness being restored, the Overlord has formed preliminary assessments of threat level, strategic implications, and potential responses. The presence of the Custodian Dreadnought represents several distinct problems, each requiring separate consideration. First and most immediate is the security concern. The object contains a warrior of unknown but clearly significant capability. Its weapon systems, though currently inactive, could theoretically threaten even armored Necron forces if brought to full activation. The power source at its core suggests operational endurance that could sustain extended combat operations. Most concerning, the warrior within possesses organic components that likely retain psychological factors like desperation and fanaticism, traits that make biological enemies unpredictable and dangerous. From a strategic perspective, the Overlord must consider what this presence means for the tomb world's broader position. If the Imperium knows this location, if they are aware that one of their custodians has been lost here, then Imperial forces may already be en route. Human spacecraft lack the sophistication of Necron vessels, but their sheer numbers can compensate for technological inferiority. A determined Imperial assault could disrupt the tomb world's awakening, potentially causing irreparable damage to systems still in the process of coming online. Even if the Necrons ultimately repel such an attack, the cost in resources and delay to full awakening could be significant. But there exists another possibility, one that the Overlord's tactical acumen identifies immediately. The Dreadnought's condition suggests it has been here for some time, likely unconscious or dormant throughout that period. If the Imperium knew its location, they would have mounted a recovery operation already. The fact that no such operation has occurred suggests that the humans do not know where their warrior is. This creates opportunity. The Necrons possess leverage that could be used in negotiations. A hostage whose value to the Imperium might be leveraged into concessions or intelligence about human military movements in the region. The Overlord considers the tactical value of study versus destruction. Simply eliminating the Dreadnought would be the safest course of action, removing the potential threat it represents while denying the Imperium any chance of recovery. But such action would also destroy a unique opportunity to analyze Imperial technology at its highest levels. The Cryptek has already noted materials and engineering principles previously unknown to Necron databases. Thorough examination could yield insights into human manufacturing capabilities, weapon design philosophies, and potentially vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future conflicts. There is also the question of honor, a concept that the Overlord's personality matrix retains. Despite millions of years of mechanical existence, the warrior within that sarcophagus is clearly a champion, one of their species' finest, deployed only in circumstances of supreme importance. To destroy such an opponent without first offering them the chance to face their fate with dignity would be beneath the standards that governed Necron nobility. If the Dreadnought awakens and proves itself through combat, that achievement should be acknowledged regardless of the warrior's species or allegiance. These considerations vie for priority in the Overlord's processing capacity, each weighted according to complex algorithms that factor in short-term risk against long-term gain, tactical necessity against strategic opportunity. The analysis requires time by human standards. Though measured in Necron computational cycles, it represents mere microseconds. The decision, when it comes, reflects the Overlord's nature as both warrior and ruler, someone who understands that true victory comes, not from simple violence, but from making choices that strengthen one's position across multiple dimensions of conflict. The Dreadnought will be preserved and studied, but under conditions that minimize the risk it represents. The Cryptek will be given access to conduct non-invasive analysis, gathering as much data as possible without triggering defensive systems or awakening the pilot. Simultaneously, preparations will be made to contain the construct should it activate, with overlapping fields of fire established by warrior phalanxes and Lich Guard positioned to respond to any aggressive action. The Tomb Mind will be instructed to monitor the Dreadnought's power signatures constantly, ready to alert command hierarchy instantly if activation protocols begin. Most importantly, the Overlord orders acceleration of the general awakening. More warriors must be brought online, more systems restored to full function. The Tomb World has been stirring slowly, its awakening gradual and measured, to conserve energy and ensure all systems achieve stability before full activation. But the presence of this unknown threat demands faster action. If combat comes, they will face it with proper numbers and tactical deployment, not with the handful of forces currently available. The Overlord issues these commands with the absolute authority that their rank carries. Throughout the tomb complex, stasis crypts begin opening in numbers that dwarf previous activation levels. Warriors by the thousands stir from their long sleep, their programming initializing, their weapons systems beginning activation sequences. Immortals, those Necrons who retained greater personality and capability through the biotransference, rise from their slumber with fuller awareness, immediately understanding their purpose and moving to defensive positions. Lich Guard, the elite bodyguards of the noble class, assume their stations near critical areas, prepared to defend them with guardian phase shifts that make them nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. In specialized armories sealed by quantum locks, war machines begin their awakening processes. Tomb stalkers uncurl from maintenance niches, their segmented bodies articulating with mechanical precision as they test systems long dormant. Doomsday arcs power up their primary weapons, the massive Gauss annihilators whose beams can reduce battle tanks to atomic vapor. Monoliths, those massive pyramid-shaped constructs that serve as both teleportation hubs and weapons platforms, activate their eternity gates, testing the connection to the tomb's translocation network. The Cryptek, granted permission to proceed with their analysis, approaches the Dreadnought with renewed purpose. They have access now to resources previously unavailable, able to requisition any equipment or assistance needed for their work. Additional scarab swarms are summoned, their programming updated with specific scanning protocols designed by the Cryptek's advanced understanding of dimensional physics. Specialized sensors are deployed, instruments so sensitive they can detect the quantum entanglement between individual atoms, measure probability fields with precision that makes standard Imperial augury look like guesswork. The examination begins in earnest, layer by layer, system by system. The Cryptek starts with the armor plating, analyzing not just its material composition, but the manufacturing process used to create it. The molecular structure of the auramite suggests forging techniques that require temperatures and pressures far beyond what standard Imperial foundries achieve. Impurities in the metal form patterns that appear intentional rather than random, possibly some form of deliberate enhancement that alters the material's physical properties at the quantum level. Moving to the weapon systems, the Cryptek identifies power couplings, whose design implies understanding of energy dynamics that humans should not possess. The Achilles Dreadspear incorporates a capacitor array capable of storing and releasing electrical potential in controlled bursts, allowing the blade's power field to function efficiently despite the tremendous energy demands. The Corvée Las Pulsar uses a lensing system that seems to violate standard principles of optics, focusing coherent light in ways that should cause the beam to disperse but somehow doesn't. But it is the sarcophagus itself that proves most fascinating. The Cryptek deploys their most sophisticated sensors, instruments that can analyze matter without directly contacting it, probing through multiple dimensions simultaneously to build a complete picture of what lies within. The shielding that protects the pilot demonstrates engineering that rivals Necron stasis technology, possibly incorporating principles borrowed from Xenos species or lost human knowledge. Within that protection, the Cryptek detects the warrior themselves. The biological scan reveals a being that pushes the boundaries of what human can mean. The genetic structure is recognizably descended from baseline Homo sapiens, but modifications have been made at levels so fundamental that the result might as well be a different species. Muscle tissue demonstrates density that shouldn't be possible in organic matter without collapsing under its own weight. The skeleton shows reinforcement at the molecular level, possibly through integration of metallic compounds, creating bone that could withstand impacts that would pulverize standard human anatomy. Most remarkably, the nervous system operates with efficiency that approaches artificial augmentation, neurons firing at rates that suggest chemical enhancement at the synaptic level. But there are gaps in the data, aspects of the pilot's biology that the sensors cannot penetrate. Something shields portions of their nervous system from analysis, possibly psychic wards or technology so advanced it appears as absence rather than presence. The Cryptek notes these blind spots with professional interest, understanding that what cannot be measured often proves more significant than what can. They compile their findings into comprehensive reports, sending them directly to the Overlord for review and strategic assessment. The Overlord reviews this data alongside tactical updates from across the tomb complex. The accelerated awakening proceeds according to schedule, with warrior forces reaching numbers adequate to mount effective defense against most conventional threats. Sensor grids have been extended to the planet's surface, monitoring for any sign of Imperial vessels in orbit or approaching through the system. Communication nodes have established contact with neighboring tomb worlds, informing them of the situation and requesting intelligence about Imperial military movements in the region. So far, all indications suggest that the Imperium remains ignorant of this tomb world's location and the fate of their missing custodian. No ships have been detected. No probes have penetrated the planet's atmosphere. The humans appear to have lost track of their warrior entirely, whether through warp storms, navigational errors, or simple bad fortune. This gives the Necrons time, the most valuable resource in warfare, time to strengthen defenses, to study the Dreadnought thoroughly, to decide on the optimal course of action. But the Overlord knows better than to mistake current silence for permanent security. The Imperium's bureaucracy may be slow and inefficient, but their determination is legendary. They will not abandon one of their custodians without exhaustive search efforts. Eventually, those efforts may lead to this world. The question is whether that discovery comes weeks from now or centuries, and whether the tomb world will be ready when it does. A strategic decision crystallizes in the Overlord's processing matrix. The tomb world must prepare not just for immediate threats, but for long-term conflict with the Imperium. This means accelerating not just warrior awakening, but also the restoration of starships, orbital defenses, and strategic weapon systems. The crypts must be secured against potential Imperial infiltration attempts. The translocation network must be expanded to allow rapid redeployment of forces across the planet's surface. Most crucially, contingency plans must be developed for multiple scenarios, including the possibility that the Dreadnought itself becomes active and must be confronted. For now, the ancient warrior sleeps, unaware of the activity surrounding them, unconscious of the analysis being conducted on their technology and physiology, ignorant of the strategic calculations being made about their continued existence. But power continues to accumulate in their emergency reserves. Systems continue their automated diagnostics. And somewhere in the depths of that armored sarcophagus, beyond the reach of Necron sensors, a consciousness that has not truly surrendered to oblivion waits for the moment when circumstances demand awakening. The Overlord issues final commands before returning to broader strategic concerns. The Dreadnought is to be moved to a more secure location, a vault deep within the tomb's central complex where it can be contained if necessary and studied without interruption. Warrior phalanxes are assigned to guard duty in rotating shifts, ensuring constant surveillance. The Cryptech receives authorization to continue analysis until explicitly ordered to cease, and a standing order goes to all forces. If the construct activates, contain but do not destroy unless absolutely necessary. The value of this prisoner, both as leverage and intelligence source, exceeds the risk they represent. These preparations complete, the Overlord's attention turns to the broader challenge of awakening and securing the tomb world. But even as they coordinate defensive deployments and system restorations, a portion of their processing capacity remains, focused on the mysterious warrior in their custody. Questions without answers nag at their consciousness. How did this being come to rest here? What mission brought them to this world? Are there others searching for them, even now? And most importantly, what will happen when they finally awaken and realize where they are? The answers to these questions will come, perhaps in hours, perhaps in years. The Necrons, deathless and patient, can wait. But the Overlord suspects that waiting may not be an option they enjoy for long. Forces are in motion beyond their control, circumstances aligning that could trigger the warrior's emergence at any moment. And when that moment arrives, when golden armor blazes with reactive power and ancient oaths demand terrible vengeance, the tomb world will face a test that no amount of preparation can entirely mitigate. Because while the Necrons have mastered technology that can strip matter to its component atoms and fold space like paper, while they command armies that can phase through walls and weapons that unmake reality itself, they have never faced a warrior forged by the Emperor's own hand, dedicated to a cause that transcends mere survival, armed with faith that can move mountains and determination that death itself cannot diminish. The confrontation is coming. The only question is what form it will take and whether either side is truly prepared for what it means. The Custodian stirs. Emergence from stasis. Within the armored sarcophagus, processes invisible to Necron scanners begin their slow work. The Custodian Dreadnought systems have never truly been dormant in the sense that the Necrons understand sleep. Imperial technology, particularly that crafted for the Adeptus Custodes, incorporates principles that blend the mechanical, with something that approaches the mystical fusion of science and faith that produces results inexplicable by pure material analysis. The machine spirit that inhabits the Dreadnought has been aware, throughout its apparent dormancy, watching, waiting, assessing conditions for the optimal moment to trigger full awakening. This machine spirit is not simply programming or algorithmic response. It is consciousness that has evolved through centuries of service, shaped by communion with the Custodian pilot, whose will permeates every circuit and servo. Together, pilot and machine exist in symbiosis that transcends the crude interface between Necron engram and living metal body. Where the Necrons lost much of their sentience through biotransference, becoming diminished versions of their former selves, the Custodian's transformation into Dreadnought pilot has been one of expansion, human excellence joining with blessed technology to create something greater than either component alone. The emergency protocols that initiated stasis after the catastrophic fall did so with wisdom born of centuries of combat experience. The Custodian recognized immediately that they were in hostile territory, surrounded by Xenos technology, severely damaged and unable to effectively resist whatever forces might discover them. Better to shut down, conserve power, wait for circumstances that favor action, than expend precious reserves in futile struggle. The decision to enter stasis was tactical calculation, not surrender, made in microseconds by a mind that processes battlefield data faster than unaugmented humans can form conscious thought. Throughout the period of dormancy, basic monitoring systems have remained active, drawing minimal power to maintain awareness of the external environment. The Dreadnought's sensors, though vastly different in principle from Necron equivalents, are nonetheless sophisticated instruments capable of detecting electromagnetic fluctuations, gravitational anomalies, and the peculiar energy signatures that Xenos technology produces. These sensors have noted the presence of the Canoptech constructs, registered the Cryptex examination, detected the power, signatures of awakening Necron forces throughout the tomb complex. All of this information feeds into tactical assessment subroutines that never sleep, constantly updating threat evaluations and strategic options. The Dreadnought systems recognize that they are outnumbered, possibly surrounded by enemies numbering in the thousands. Direct confrontation would be futile. But they also detect patterns in the enemy movements, identify choke points in the tomb's architecture, calculate optimal routes for fighting withdrawal or defensive positions that could be held against superior numbers. The machine spirit prepares, ready for the moment when action becomes necessary. That moment approaches now, triggered by factors both external and internal. The power reserves, slowly accumulating through processes the Necrons have not detected, reach threshold levels necessary to support full combat operations. The Custodian's organic components, sustained through emergency life support that would seem miraculous to Imperial medical officers, begin responding to combat stimulants automatically released as systems prepare for activation. Most significantly, the machine spirit's monitoring protocols detect changes in the tomb's alert status that suggest imminent danger, increased guard presence, defensive preparations that indicate the Necrons are anticipating action. The decision to emerge comes not as sudden impulse, but as culmination of countless tactical assessments, each input weighed against mission parameters that remain absolute regardless of circumstance. The Custodian serves the Emperor. The Emperor's will demands that his servants resist the Xenos in all its forms. Therefore, regardless of odds or outcome, the warrior must fight. Not from desperation or rage, but from simple commitment to purpose that defined their existence in life and continues to shape their undead vigil. Awakening begins with restoration of primary systems, power flowing from emergency reserves to servos that have lain dormant for indeterminate time. The machine spirit initiates diagnostic sequences, verifying the functionality of critical components, identifying damaged systems, and routing around failures. The process is methodical, orderly, each activation following protocols designed to minimize the risk of cascading failures or energy spikes that might alert external monitors. But this caution can only extend so far. When the Dreadnought's reactor begins its transition from standby to operational status, when fusion processes ignite and power output surges to combat levels, concealment becomes impossible. The energy signature blazes like a star in the Necron sensors, impossible to mistake or misidentify. Throughout the tomb complex, alarms activate. Warrior phalanxes assigned to guard duty snap to full alert. The cryptech, in the middle of analyzing data gathered from previous scans, registers the massive power spike with shock that overcomes even their attenuated emotional responses. The Overlord receives the alert instantly, Priority 1 messages cutting through all other activities. Their response is immediate and decisive, orders issued in the microseconds between detecting the activation and the moment when the Dreadnought systems achieve full operational status. Warriors converge on the vault where the Dreadnought is stored, Gauss weapons charged and ready. Lichguard take positions at critical choke points, their phase-shifting abilities making them perfect guards against a foe attempting to escape. The entire tomb transitions to battle stations, automated defenses coming online, weapon systems targeting the vault where the ancient warrior awakens. Inside the sarcophagus, the Custodian's consciousness surfaces from depths where it has dwelt in state beyond dreams or thought. Their awareness expands, taking in data from sensors that paint a picture of their surroundings more complete than human sight could ever provide. They perceive the vault's dimensions through sonar, echo, and magnetic field analysis. They detect the mass of Necron warriors assembling outside through vibration sensors that feel footsteps through the stone floor. They sense the power signatures of exotic weapons charging, feel the reality-bending effects of phase technology activating nearby. The tactical situation is dire beyond measure. They are deep within enemy territory, surrounded by Xenos forces of unknown but clearly substantial numbers, with no support and no reinforcements possible. Every training scenario, every combat simulation ever run by the Custodian Guard has emphasized that such circumstances demand immediate offensive action, striking before the enemy can fully coordinate their response. But this warrior did not survive centuries of service by following doctrine blindly. They assess their options with clarity, born of supreme discipline and tactical genius that matches any enemy commander. The Dreadnought's weapon systems complete. Activation sequences. The Achilles Dreadspear's power field crackles to life, energy dancing along the massive blade's edge. The Lastrum Storm Bolter's chamber rounds, their targeting systems acquiring multiple threats beyond the vault's sealed doors. The refractor field generators hum with building power, ready to project defensive barriers that can turn aside even the most powerful attacks. Every system reports green, ready for combat, awaiting only the pilot's command to unleash violence that would cow lesser warriors. But alongside this military might, the Custodian possesses something equally valuable: intelligence that encompasses not just tactical knowledge, but strategic understanding of the broader war. They recognize Necron technology from briefings and previous encounters. They understand that these Xenos represent one of the galaxy's most significant threats, ancient beings whose power rivals and potentially exceeds anything the Imperium can field. They know that information about this tomb world, its location, its force composition, its defensive capabilities, represents intelligence of incalculable value. The warrior makes a decision that speaks to the breadth of their training and the depth of their dedication. They will not make futile last stand here, spending their final moments in glorious but pointless combat. Instead, they will gather intelligence, assess enemy capabilities, and survive if possible to deliver that information to Imperial forces. This is not cowardice, but supreme courage, choosing the harder path of potential capture and interrogation over the easier glory of death in battle. The Dreadnought's external voxcasters activate, speaking in high Gothic, modulated through mechanical systems that give the voice weight and presence that physical vocal cords could never achieve. I am Constantus Valorian, sentinel of the Emperor's Aegis, shield of terror, warden of the Golden Throne. I stand in the presence of Xenos abominations, whose very existence is affront to humanity's rightful dominion. But I am not without reason. Grant me audience with your commander, that we might speak as warriors before conflict makes discourse impossible. The words echo through the vault and beyond, transmitted through the tomb's acoustic properties and picked up by Necron sensors. They carry not just meaning, but presence, authority that cannot be denied even by beings who have lost most capacity for emotion or respect. This is not supplication or plea, but demand, made by one who knows their worth and will not be treated as simple prisoner to be disposed of without ceremony. In the tomb's command center, the Overlord receives this message with processing cycles devoted entirely to analysis. The warrior speaks, demonstrating sapience and tactical reasoning. The use of diplomatic overture suggests understanding of politics and negotiation uncommon in the Imperium's soldiers. Most significantly, the tone carries absolute confidence, no hint of fear or desperation, despite the obviously disadvantageous tactical situation. The Overlord's response comes after consideration that measures perhaps 3 seconds by human reckoning, but which encompasses millions of computational cycles analyzing implications and outcomes. They activate the tomb's communication systems, their own voice, rendered in metallic tones that carry the weight of millions of years of existence. I am Xandrek's eternal patience, Overlord of this tomb world, commander of the legions that slumber here, inheritor of the authority granted to me when stars were young and your species had not yet crawled from whatever primordial ooze spawned it. You trespass in my domain, human, whether by intention or accident. Explain how you came to be here, what you know of this tomb's location, and why I should not simply extract what intelligence you possess through methods that need not concern themselves with your continued existence. The exchange establishes parameters for what follows, 2 commanders acknowledging each other's capacity while making clear that cooperation does not equal surrender. Neither can afford to show weakness, neither can allow the other to dictate terms. What emerges is negotiation born of mutual respect and mutual threat, each side possessing leverage that makes immediate violence suboptimal despite the clear antagonism. The Custodian responds with honesty that is itself a tactical choice, providing information that can be verified while withholding details that might compromise Imperial operations. They describe their presence as a result of warp storm and structural collapse, events beyond their control that deposited them in depths of the tomb. They acknowledge ignorance of the tomb's precise location, their navigational systems damaged beyond function. They offer assessment of their own tactical situation with brutal frankness, neither overstating nor understating the danger they represent. The Overlord processes this information, comparing it against data gathered by the cryptech and monitoring systems. The explanation is plausible, fitting patterns of warp storm behavior and matching the damage profile detected in earlier scans. More importantly, it suggests that the Imperium does not know this tomb's location, that no rescue force is forthcoming. This changes strategic calculations significantly, reducing immediate threat level while raising questions about long-term disposition of the prisoner. But this is also opportunity, chance to engage in discourse with a warrior of the Imperium's elite, to gather intelligence about human capabilities and intentions, to understand better the enemy that the Necrons will inevitably face as their full awakening proceeds. The Overlord issues orders that surprise even their own strategic staff. The vault doors will open. The Custodian will be granted limited freedom of movement within a controlled sector of the tomb. Guards will maintain position but will not attack unless provoked. And most significantly, the Overlord themselves will meet with this warrior personally, face to face, that both sides might take each other's full measure. The massive vault doors begin to slide open, black stone panels retreating into walls with movements that appear to ignore gravity and friction. Beyond, The Custodian's sensors detect a corridor lined with Necron warriors, Gauss weapons trained on the doorway, ready to fire at the first sign of hostile action. At the corridor's end, a larger figure waits, taller than the standard warriors, bearing itself with presence that even through sensor analysis communicates authority and power. The Overlord, come to meet their prisoner personally. The Custodian Dreadnought steps forward, servos moving with grace that belies the chassis' size. They advance slowly, projecting no threat, weapons present but not aimed, refractor field active but not at full power. This is diplomatic approach, not battle deployment, though. Any observer could see that transition from one to the other could occur in microseconds should circumstance demand. The two commanders face each other across the corridor, separated by perhaps 20 meters of space and millions of years of divergent history. On one side, ancient nobility, incarnated in living metal, representing a civilization that spanned the galaxy when humanity's ancestors were still learning to use tools. On the other, the finest product of human genetic engineering and technological achievement, embodying the Emperor's will and the Imperium's refusal to submit to Xenos dominion. Neither speaks for a long moment, each taking the measure of the other, calculating strengths and identifying weaknesses, preparing for whatever comes next. The silence stretches, filled with tension that could break into violence at any moment, but which for now remains merely potential, possibility, rather than actuality. When the Overlord finally speaks again, their tone carries something that might be respect, acknowledgement of the warrior before them as worthy opponent, rather than simple threat to be eliminated. You are far from any support, Custodian Valorian. Your Emperor cannot save you here. Your brothers do not know where you are. By any logical analysis, your situation is hopeless. Yet you stand before me, not as broken prisoner, but as representative of your kind, maintaining dignity and purpose, despite all odds. This is admirable in its way. Perhaps we might find common ground, sufficient to make your captivity less uncomfortable. The Custodian's response is immediate, delivered with certainty that admits no compromise. I acknowledge no captivity, Xenos, for I have not surrendered, and will not while consciousness remains. We may speak as warriors, may exchange knowledge as adversaries who recognize each other's capability, but do not mistake tactical decision for submission to your authority. I serve the Emperor alone, and his will transcends any circumstance you might impose. The Overlord's laughter, when it comes, sounds like grinding metal, devoid of humor, but communicating acknowledgement of the human's position. As you wish. Then we shall speak not as captor and prisoner, but as commanders trapped by circumstance in temporary coexistence. Until such time as necessity demands, we resume the eternal war that defines our kinds. Come, I would show you something that may interest you, that you might understand what you face and what facing it costs. The invitation is unprecedented, violation of security protocols that would horrify the Overlord's strategic staff if they possessed capacity for such emotion. But it is also calculated risk, opportunity to demonstrate Necron superiority while simultaneously gathering behavioral data about how the Custodian responds to psychological pressure. Wars are won not just through superior firepower, but through understanding enemy psychology, identifying pressure points that can be exploited, crafting strategies that leverage weakness against strength. The Custodian, after a moment of consideration, accepts. They have little choice, and the opportunity to gather intelligence about the tomb's layout and capabilities outweighs the risks of whatever the Overlord plans to demonstrate. Together, Xenos commander and Imperial warrior proceed deeper into the tomb complex, surrounded by guards who maintain watchful distance, heading toward revelation that will change both their understanding of the conflict that defines their existence. What follows will be encounter unlike any other in the 41st millennium, meeting of minds as alien to each other as quantum mechanics to medieval philosophy, exchange of perspectives separated by millions of years of divergent evolution and competing visions of the galaxy's future. Neither can convince the other. Neither will surrender their position. But in the crucible of this dialogue, truths will emerge that both sides must grapple with. Questions that have no easy answers, and perhaps the faint possibility that understanding need not equal agreement, that enemies might acknowledge each other's perspective without abandoning their own. The age of wonders has long since passed in the 41st millennium. But in this unlikely meeting between ancient machine god and humanity's finest warrior, wonder still has place, brief moment, where the eternal war pauses not from weakness, but from recognition, that some opponents demand respect, even as one prepares to destroy them. The broader implications. When ancient powers collide. The encounter between the Custodian Dreadnought and the Necron tomb world represents far more than simply another skirmish in the galaxy's endless conflicts. It embodies the fundamental tensions that define the 41st millennium, crystallizes the competing visions of what the galaxy should be and who has rightful claim to dominion over the stars. To truly understand the significance of this meeting, we must step back from the immediate tactical situation and consider the broader context in which these forces operate. The Necrons view themselves as the galaxy's rightful rulers, inheritors of a claim that predates every other sentient species currently alive. They walked among the stars when humanity's ancestors were still single-celled organisms floating in primordial oceans. They fought wars that reshaped reality itself, wielding weapons that could extinguish suns and shatter planets. Their civilization achieved heights of technological sophistication that the Imperium, even at the apex of the dark age of technology, never approached. From their perspective, the current inhabitants of the galaxy are squatters, temporary occupants of territory that belongs to the Necrons by right of ancient conquest. This belief is not mere arrogance or delusion. The Necrons possess the technology to back up their claims, weapons and capabilities that make even the Imperium's finest achievements look primitive by comparison. Their Gauss weapons strip matter apart at the molecular level, with efficiency that conventional physics says should be impossible. Their phase technology allows them to step through walls and disappear from real space entirely. Their resurrection protocols mean that even destroyed warriors can be rebuilt and returned to service, making them effectively immortal in ways that transcend mere longevity. Yet for all this power, the Necrons labor under limitations that no amount of technology can overcome. The biotransference that granted them immortality also robbed them of their souls, left them as shadows of what they once were. The Great Awakening has not gone according to plan, with millions of Necrons lost to system failures, tomb worlds destroyed by geological catastrophes, and entire dynasties reduced to mindless automatons by degradation of their personality engrams. They are ancient, powerful, and terribly diminished from what they were at their height. Against this ancient might stands the Imperium of mankind, an empire barely 10,000 years old, but spanning millions of worlds. Where the Necrons number in the millions at best, humanity counts its population in the trillions. Where the Necrons possess superior technology, humans compensate through sheer industrial output, producing weapons and vehicles in quantities that dwarf what any other civilization can achieve. Most significantly, humanity possesses something the Necrons lost millions of years ago: the capacity for genuine innovation, the ability to adapt and change in response to new challenges. The Custodian Guard embodies the Imperium at its finest, representing what humanity can achieve when the Emperor's own genius is applied to the creation of warriors. Each Custodian is a masterwork, handcrafted through processes that blend science and something that approaches the mystical, combining genetic manipulation with psycho-conditioning and training that transforms infant into demigod. They are incorruptible where space marines might fall to chaos. They are individually superior where Astartes rely on coordinated tactics. They serve not from compulsion or programming, but from genuine dedication to an ideal that transcends their own existence. When forces such as these meet, when Custodian faces Necron Overlord in circumstances that allow for dialogue rather than immediate violence, it creates opportunity for understanding that rarely emerges from battlefield confrontation. Each side gains insight into the other's perspective, sees the galaxy through eyes so fundamentally different that the very concepts of right and wrong become mutable. The Necrons look at the Custodian and see a warrior of impressive capability, trapped in service to a dying god whose empire crumbles despite the best efforts of its defenders. The Custodian looks at the Necrons and sees tragic beings who traded everything that made life meaningful for immortality. That has become a curse they cannot escape. Neither perspective is entirely wrong. The Emperor does languish on the Golden Throne, sustained through horrific sacrifice of thousands of Psykers daily, his dreams of a united humanity shattered by the Horus heresy and the 10,000 years of decay that followed. The Imperium that fights in his name bears little resemblance to the secular, enlightened civilization he sought to create, having devolved into theocratic nightmare where innovation is heresy and questioning doctrine invites execution. Yet it endures, holding back the darkness through sheer stubborn refusal to submit, buying time for humanity to perhaps one day reclaim the promise that the Emperor's vision represented. Similarly, the Necrons cannot deny the hollowness of their existence, the terrible price they paid for immortality. They possess the entire galaxy in potential, but find no joy in that possession. They are deathless, but cannot savor the gift of continued existence. They have power beyond imagining, but lack the capacity to feel triumph when that power achieves victory. The Silent King himself acknowledges this, his return to the galaxy, motivated not by conquest, but by desperate search for a way to reverse the biotransference, to somehow reclaim the mortality that would allow his people to truly live again, rather than merely persist. The tomb world where this encounter occurs represents a microcosm of the broader struggle. It is Necron territory by any reasonable measure, a world they claimed and built upon millions of years before humanity first looked up at the stars. Yet it exists in a galaxy where human colonies spread across thousands of systems, where the Imperium's sheer demographic weight makes them impossible to ignore or dismiss. The Necrons have the superior claim by age and technological achievement, but humans have the numbers and industrial capacity to make disputing that claim costly beyond calculation. This creates strategic calculus that neither side can ignore. The Necrons could, theoretically, destroy human civilization if all their tomb worlds awakened simultaneously and coordinated their efforts. But that coordination is impossible given the fractured nature of their awakening, the isolation between dynasties, and the madness that has claimed many of their greatest leaders. Meanwhile, the Imperium could potentially overwhelm individual tomb worlds through sheer weight of numbers, throwing enough ships and soldiers at the problem until even Necron technology cannot stem the tide. But the cost would be astronomical, resources desperately needed elsewhere, sacrificed to eliminate threats that may not pose immediate danger. The result is uneasy coexistence, punctuated by conflict, when territory or resources force confrontation. Neither side can afford to fully commit to destroying the other, while countless additional threats demand attention. The Necrons must contend with the fact that their ancient enemy, the Aeldari, still exists in diminished but dangerous form. The Imperium faces threats from Chaos, Tyranids, Orcs, and a dozen other Xenos species. Neither can focus solely on the other without courting disaster from different quarters. Within this broader context, the meeting between Custodian and Necron Overlord takes on significance beyond the immediate tactical situation. It represents testing ground for whether these civilizations can find any basis for coexistence beyond mutual exhaustion. The dialogue that emerges, the exchange of perspectives and acknowledgement of each other's capability, creates possibility, however faint that pure antagonism might not be the only option. This does not mean peace or alliance. The ideological gaps are too vast, the historical grievances too deep, the fundamental opposition of their visions too complete for genuine cooperation. The Necrons seek restoration of their ancient empire, a galaxy where they rule supreme and lesser. Species exist only to serve or be harvested for resources. The Imperium fights for humanity's right to exist, to claim the stars as their own, to create civilization that serves human interests rather than Xenos agendas. These visions cannot be reconciled. But between total war and genuine peace exists a spectrum of possibilities. Temporary truces to address mutual threats, information exchange that benefits both sides while maintaining fundamental opposition, rules of engagement that limit conflict scope without requiring either side to abandon their ultimate objectives. The Necrons and Imperium have demonstrated capacity for such arrangements before, in isolated incidents where immediate survival demanded cooperation against threats like tyrannid hive fleets or chaos incursions that endangered both sides. The Custodian's presence in the tomb creates opportunity for such arrangement, however temporary. They possess intelligence about Imperial military dispositions, information the Necrons would value. The Necrons could offer safe passage off-world, restoration of the Dreadnought's damaged systems, even transportation to Imperial territory. The cost to them would be minimal, the potential benefits significant if it establishes precedent for future interactions. Similarly, the Custodian might gain knowledge about Necron capabilities, force dispositions, strategic intentions, intelligence that could save countless human lives if delivered to Imperial authorities. Yet such practical considerations must contend with principles that neither side can easily compromise. The Custodian serves the Emperor, whose vision of the galaxy admits no legitimate authority but his own and humanity's manifest destiny to rule. Accepting Necron assistance, treating with Xenos as though they were equals rather than obstacles to be overcome, would violate oaths that the Custodian holds more sacred than their own existence. The Overlord similarly cannot appear weak before subordinates who watch for any sign that their leadership deserves challenge, cannot establish precedent of releasing dangerous prisoners without extracting maximum advantage. The tension between practical necessity and ideological commitment creates drama that transcends simple action and violence. These are not mindless forces colliding, but thinking beings making choices, weighing options, deciding between courses of action that all carry costs and benefits. The Custodian must balance duty to gather intelligence against imperative to resist the Xenos. The Overlord must weigh value of maintaining prisoner against risks that continued containment represents. Neither can afford to show weakness. Neither can make concessions that might be interpreted as surrender. What emerges from this crucible is not resolution, but rather clarification of positions, understanding that allows both sides to operate with full knowledge of what they face. The Custodian learns that Necron technology truly does exceed Imperial capabilities in many areas, that these ancient beings represent threat that cannot be overcome through conventional military means alone. The Overlord discovers that humanity's finest warriors live up to their legendary reputation, that the Imperium fields forces capable of standing against Necron might despite the vast technological disparity. This mutual acknowledgement changes nothing about the fundamental conflict, but it informs how that conflict proceeds. Future encounters between Custodians and Necrons will carry weight of this meeting, awareness that the enemy possesses both capability and dignity, that victory will not come easily or cheaply. Strategic planning on both sides must account for the reality that their opponents are not simple obstacles to be brushed aside, but worthy adversaries who will extract terrible price for any advance. The tomb world itself becomes a different place after this encounter. It is no longer simply another Necron installation awakening, according to ancient protocols, but site where meaningful exchange occurred between representatives of civilizations that should have nothing to say to each other. The memory of this meeting, preserved in Necron databanks and potentially in whatever reports the Custodian manages to transmit, will influence future interactions between these forces. It establishes precedent, creates context, demonstrates that even in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, possibilities exist beyond simple violence. Yet we must not mistake this for happy ending or resolution that satisfies all parties. The Custodian remains trapped in hostile territory, surrounded by enemies, dependent on captors' goodwill for continued existence. The Necrons possess prisoner, whose value is matched only by the danger they represent if they escape or are rescued. The broader conflict between Imperium and Necron dynasties continues unabated, each battle adding to death tolls that beggar imagination, each loss diminishing resources neither side can easily replace. In the end, this encounter between ancient Necron and ageless Custodian serves as a reminder of what the 41st millennium is and what it might have been. It shows us a galaxy where ancient powers still walk, where humanity's finest achievements pale beside what older civilizations accomplished, where the price of survival is measured in choices that would break lesser beings. It demonstrates that even in an age of darkness and war, understanding remains possible, that enemies might acknowledge each other's worth, even as they prepare for conflict that can have no victor, only survivors. The grim darkness of the far future admits no easy answers, offers no simple solutions to the conflicts that define it. But in moments like this, when adversaries meet as warriors rather than monsters, when recognition passes between beings who should have nothing in common, we see flickers of what existence might be if circumstances were different, if the galaxy's ancient wounds could heal, if understanding could translate into something more than mutual destruction. Those moments pass. The eternal war resumes. But they leave marks on those who experience them, changes perspectives in ways that cannot be undone, plants seeds of doubt about whether the conflict truly must continue until one side achieves total victory or both exhaust themselves into oblivion. The Custodian will carry knowledge of this encounter for as long as they survive, and the Necrons will remember that humanity produces warriors worthy of respect, even from beings who walked the galaxy before Earth's sun was born. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Warhammer 40k lore, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more immersive storytelling from the grim darkness of the far future. Your support helps us create more content exploring the rich universe of the 41st millennium, where there is only war, but where that war contains moments of unexpected complexity and profound meaning. Thank you for watching, and remember, the Emperor protects.